obviously Led Zeppelin are pretty renowned in rock fans' minds as people who've got a hand in the occult. So in '69, 2 years after Pepper, Zeppelin arrive on the scene, of course, then guitarist Jimmy Page dives heavily into Crowley. He's bought relics, he's doing spells. He apparently opened a bookstore called the Equinox, which is an occult bookstore named after one of Crowley's books. So he apparently also tries to get the whole band to do this particular incantation and ritual at the start of the career. Only one of them says no, and we'll come back to that later. But when he used his earnings to buy loads of Crowley's old stuff, he also bought Boleskine House in 1970, which, as we discovered earlier, was the house he bought on Loch Ness to do with spells. Now, he owned it for 22 years, but only lived in it 6 weeks. Now, we don't know whether that's down to he didn't like it in there or whether he was, he's Jimmy Page, so he's on tour all the time.
Right.
But he was quite overt with his occult interest, Jimmy Page. It's not like with what we just discussed with the Beatles, where you have to look at clues. Like, he's quite outward with it. Now, Led Zeppelin 3, the album, in the outro groove, is actually carved, "Do What Thou Wilt." And that's that he carved it onto the original press that all the other presses were made from. And on the other side, he carved "So Mote It Be." Now, that saying, "So Mote It Be," interestingly, is often said at the end of spells in witchcraft. So you'll do your spell and you'll end up with "So Mote It Be." Now, people have said it's interesting what Jimmy Page could have been doing there, because if you think about like how concentration and will is meant to work with spells and black magic, and at some point when they release Led Zeppelin 3, Jimmy Page will be fully aware that there's going to be millions of records all spinning at the same time with "Do What Thou Wilt" and "So Mote It Be" on the back.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too. When you talk about the whole, as time goes by, I always say this: you forget, like, okay, well, there's really no crazy rock and roll bands right now, but Guns N' Roses was so nuts, and then you go back, well, the Stones are so nuts, but when you get into the real nitty gritty of it, Led Zeppelin was kind of the original, just completely insane rock and roll band. So amongst all the other crazy things they did, once again, the fact that Jimmy Page lived in this mansion on the hills of Loch Ness that was owned by Aleister Crowley, of course he did. Why wouldn't you? But the fact that he only lived there for 6 weeks, you start to wonder, I wonder why. I wonder why that
exactly.
is.
There's a cool thing with Jimmy Page as well. He met Kenneth Anger at the auction house Sotheby's to try and buy some, when they were competing with each other to buy some Crowley memorabilia. And Kenneth Anger's like an occult film director and a big follower of Crowley. And he was making a film at the time called Lucifer Rising, which was an occult film. Now, they started to have problems with the film itself during filming. And his lead actor, Bobby Buziol, I think it's pronounced, or Buzilail, he ran off with some of the film and some of the equipment and said that he'd buried it in the desert and would only give it back to Kenneth Anger if Anger paid his friend this massive amount of money. Now, Kenneth Anger refused, and instead, he cursed the guy. Now, 1 year on, this guy was jailed for life for murder because his friend who took the film and buried it was Charles Manson.
Yeah, I know where you're going with that. Bobby Beausoleil.
Beausoleil, that's his name.
He was one of the Manson family. I didn't realize he was an actor.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't until researching this. And Manson's popping back up again, which is another weird thing. But he also then, because it was all going to pot, this film, Page stepped in and said he'd do the soundtrack. But it soured over time and Page pulled out, leading to Kenneth Anger, true to form and true to his name, to get angry and cursed him. Now, this curse, he went on record to say he's pulled off this massive curse and, they should be in fear of their lives. And you could argue, all right, curses don't exist. It's all about what you believe and whether you believe it or not is how much effect it'll have. But over the next 5 years, Robert Plant had a car crash in Greece, nearly died. Because of that, he had to cancel the rest of the tour. He had to record the next album in a wheelchair. John Bonham and his manager, Peter Grant, nearly beat a guy to death and just about escaped jail. Then, obviously, Plant's son, Karak, got sick and died. Doctors didn't know what was wrong with him at the time. And he died just age 5. And then Plant left the band because Page and Jones didn't go to the funeral. And then John Bonham goes to bed steaming drunk in 1980 and dies in his sleep. During this time, Page is obviously absolutely comatose with a heroin addiction as well. So within those 5 years, the alleged curse had hit every single member except for John Paul Jones, who back at the start of Led Zeppelin didn't take part in that ritual that Jimmy Page wanted them to do.
Wow.